Okay, I'm going to come to you today and talk about electric fencing for sheep. Now my main goal with this video is simply to create a video that I could not find when I was in the setup process of this whole electric fencing for sheep thing. I've had a lot of electric fencing options for cattle, but when it came to sheep, pretty much all I was seeing was the electric fence netting. And I researched that option, but number one, it was incredibly expensive for the amount that I needed. And number two, it just didn't give me the flexibility I would have to have for what I was going into. This works on a small scale and a super small scale. We have 26 in this flock right now, but we've actually implemented this system with just 4. But in this video, I just want to give you a little bit of a rundown of how we set this up. And as some context for you, just 8 weeks ago, we moved from a continuous grazing situation where we would rotate maybe every 30 or 45 days into an intensive rotational grazing system, which is where we are now moving every other day. And the improvement in the health of the flock has been almost unbelievable. We fully expected to lose a greater portion of our flock by the end of summer, and here we are at the first of fall, and they are looking healthier than I think they have ever looked. And I'm going to run you through here just this simple electric fencing for sheep in hopes that if you are setting off on this journey of rotational grazing, this will help you. If you want a complete list of what I have used and where I purchased it, click on the link down below and I will email you sort of a checklist, absolutely free. Now, what I'm in right here, I would say this cost about $75, the fencing area that I'm in right now. And I have a lot of flexibility at that investment level. So now I say what I'm in here right now was $75. I spent a lot more money on the research and development of it, so like I said, I'm kind of hoping to cut that down for you. But again, click on the link down below and I will give you a complete shopping list for this electric fence system for sheep. So what we have is a perimeter fence that is pretty well equipped with 4-inch hog panels. Well, if we did not have that, I would just run my wire on all 4 sides rather than just 2 sides like we're doing right now. Another thing I want to mention is that during the training process, we strung up 5 strands. I think it was 4 or 5 strands. And that sounds excessive, but like I said, this was a pretty mature flock and they'd never experienced electric fencing before, and wanted to make sure that they had plenty of opportunities for contact and for understanding what that polytape was before we reduced the number of strands. Now what I'm in right now is a single strand paddock, and they do best with 2 strands, but we have been getting away with just 1 strand for the past couple of days. But like I said, moving backwards, for the first 4 weeks we made sure to pretty diligently string up 4 or 5 strands, and this was sort of a training camp for them. And that kind of helped them to understand what it was, and it kind of caused them to respect it a lot better once we did reduce the number of strands that we were working with. I want to give you some specs here. So we are working with 26 ewes. The fence charger we're working with is really pretty small. It's a solar powered fence charger and it's 0.22 joules. If you've done any research on electric fencing, you'll realize that that is pretty small. But like I said, this is a small scale rotational grazing system, but the 0.22 joules, it works very, very well for us. We have 1 permanent high tensile wire running along just 1 side of each of our pastures, and we did not do the entire perimeter of the pasture in the high tensile wire, simply because there's a lot of brush along 1 side and we're just waiting for a more opportune time to get in and prune it. But so far, just having that high tensile on 1 side is working really well. We have a couple of unique tools we found to carry the power, and again, those are going to be on that shopping list I've got for you down below. And that wire positioned it's about shoulder level on me, so it's about 5 foot off the ground. And that keeps the brush encroachment down. We don't have to worry about weed eating. A lot of people are gonna say you need to have sort of set up a training pen of sorts, and I considered that, but I don't know what it was, but I didn't. So what I did was I just set them off into their first paddock, and like I said, made sure we were strung up. And what they did was, the first thing they did out of the corral was they went up to it, they touched it, and they stampeded backwards. And it didn't take much to train them to understand what that was. But I would have to say that the multi-strands for your first few weeks is pretty essential. So let's get straight to the process. What I did was I started out with some T-post insulators that stick 2 inches out from the T-post. I ran those along one side of my pasture, and then I took a 12 gauge Gallagher aluminum high tensile wire, and I ran that up the length of my pasture. I took the grounding rod, stuck it in the ground. So here's an important thing to note on the grounding rod. Now you'd think that this was just about enough, but in all reality you only want this much of your grounding rod showing, but just enough for basically your grounding wire, which is this green one for this particular charger, to hook on. So yeah, we need that pounded down just a couple more. Pulled out an old solar electric fence charger from a previous electric fencing project, popped it up there for some charge, and then plugged it in. Next step was to get some plastic T-posts. These guys I'm pretty satisfied with for the amount that I paid for them, but I do have to say that we have broken maybe 5 of the 50 that we bought, and I bought these were on sale for $1.50 each. So I will probably have to replace all 50 here in the next 2 years, but they got us off the ground. So these were plastic step-in posts. Another thing I want to mention here is that we use polytape instead of polywire. We had a previous electric fencing setup go around, and it was largely unsuccessful. There were a couple of reasons for this, but one of them I think was that in working with sheep, we've found them to be extremely visual, and the polytape has maybe 5 times the amount of visibility that a polywire will. So we use polytape for our sheep, and that has worked out very well. And that's a decision that we made based on what we kind of have known of sheep thus far. To get that extra visibility, we did the tape instead of the wire. So once we had our plastic step-in posts kind of dotted where we wanted our fence or our paddock set up, I call it like a connect the dots kind of a game. You'll set your posts in the perimeter of your paddock, and then you will run your polytape around those posts. For sheep, the lower the better. If you have 2 strands, I would put one on the lowest rung, and when they catch sight of that, they'll veer away. If you do a single strand and you position it higher, their noses are at the ground, they're rooting around for what they're grazing, and they will slip literally right underneath it. And because they have fur, because of their wool, they're not gonna get a shock on the back. You've got to make sure that they've got that shock on their nose or some exposed portion. So there's another tip. Make sure you've got a wire that is low. So when we're doing a single wire, we'll do one about 6 or 7 inches off the ground. When we're doing 2 wires, we'll do the second one about 9 or 12 inches off the ground. So both are relatively low, and they're not gonna, well, not gonna put anything past a sheep, but we've found that they don't jump the fence unless they're absolutely scared or they're cornered. They will not jump over just to get to the other side. And of course, now that I said that, they probably will. But anyways, go low if you're gonna do a single or double strand. And like I said, just remember that training process. You probably need to string it up with 4 or 5 strands for the initial, I would say 4 or 5 weeks. So we've got the polytape in, and we are ready to attach the power. And I found these really neat little tools. They're called power links. And again, I'm going to give you the direct source for them on my shopping list down below. But they have been lifesavers, and they allow us to connect the power from up high to our polytape down low, and alternately, they allow us to connect power from a piece of polytape that is attached to the main high tensile to maybe a piece of polytape that is a little bit farther out. Since I mentioned we only run the high tensile on one side of the field right now, sometimes we're in a paddock situation where it's a little bit distanced from that. So essentially this little tool, photobomb, this little tool allows us to carry power from basically anything that has a charge and translate the power. Another little, it's a small thing, but it's been a really big thing for us, is just having a lot of bungee cords. We work with really cheap plastic reels, and to be able to take the bungee cords and attach the reels to the fence wherever your line ends has been super convenient. So like I said, this is sort of simple, but I wanted to create a video that would be something along the lines of what I was looking for as a beginner in electric fencing for sheep. And I hope using that little shopping list below, you will have the opportunity to get your ladies rotating at a much lower cost than would otherwise be. So here's how I test my fence every morning. I just grab a blade of grass, one that's a little bit more stiff. The flimsy ones is a bit harder to utilize. And you just stick it to the fence line here, and you move up the blade of grass right there until you feel the pulse, the electric pulse. And this is just one way to do it without actually being shocked.